Okay, in this video we're going to talk about the electrical conduction system of the heart. The electrical conduction system, right? Have you ever wondered how the heart is capable of generating its own rhythm? Did you know that it did? Well, listen to this. Unlike muscles in your arm, which only contract when nerves tell them to, your heart is capable of generating both its own rate of firing and the pattern of firing because of this so-called electrical conduction system. It starts here with your own built-in pacemaker, the sinoatrial node. The sinoatrial node is sort of like your little spark plug, and it has a mechanism inside that allows it to make a little spark about once a second. That electrical activity can flow right through the heart muscle. Remember, heart muscle cells are attached both mechanically and electrically, and so that's what we see here. These little dotted lines represent the electrical activity spreading from one cell to the next, so that both atria are electrically excited at about the same time. Nearly simultaneously, the backup pacemaker, the atrioventricular node, will be stimulated. This is really very similar to neural tissue. These are really a lot like myelinated axons in so much that they are going to carry the electrical activity and contain it. Not like the cell-to-cell transmission that we saw up above, mind you. The electrical activity is contained, and so the ventricles are not excited with electrical activity until the signal reaches the very ends of these little things. So what is this? The AV node. What's this? The AV bundle, which splits into right and left bundle branches. And then the tiniest little ones, Purkinje fibers, sort of like lower motor neurons. This is really where the electrical activity will excite the muscle contraction. So think about this as we watch this next video. Whoops. Well, that's unfortunate. I will make another video that has this animation so that I can walk you through it. But let's spend this video looking through the PowerPoint in a bit more of a straightforward fashion. Here's a great page that gives definitions of all of the things that we just saw. The SA node does not have a resting membrane potential. It starts to repolarize, and when it reaches the bottom, because it has these leaky sodium channels, it allows sodium to begin to trickle in. Sodium has a positive charge, and so the cell begins to depolarize. There's no resting membrane potential, nothing flat, no long pauses here. We want that SA node to fire with rhythm, right? With regularity, with periodicity. And so once we reach threshold, just like in a skeletal muscle cell or a neuron for that matter, it opens all of those voltage-gated channels. And then we see a very rapid depolarization. Repolarization. No resting membrane, but a slow upward slide. That's called the pacemaker potential. And this one's particularly important if we start to think about the effects of the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. Let me show you. If you get excited or frightened, what's going to happen is your heart rate is going to begin to speed up. Why? Why does your heart rate go up? Well, it's because the sympathetic effect is to open even more of those sodium channels. And so the slope of the pacemaker potential goes up, and we reach threshold much quicker. Notice, if you haven't before, this is time down here, right? The x-axis is our time scale. So if I increase the slope of the pacemaker potential by letting a little more sodium in, I will depolarize more quickly, and that's going to end up speeding up my heart rate. The parasympathetic effect is exactly the opposite, of course. In the parasympathetic state, which you may recall is the rest and digest state, the parasympathetic nerves end up slowing down the heart rate. And here's how. They decrease the slope of the pacemaker potential by releasing inhibitory neuropeptides onto the SA and AV nodes. The pacemakers depolarize more slowly, and therefore the heart rate decreases. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so now our challenge is to try to understand the pattern of the electrical activity in the conduction system and see how that's related to the electrical graph that we observe if we slap on an EKG. And that's what the rest of this little video is going to be about, the EKG. The electrocardiogram was invented in Germany, and so that's probably how they pronounced it, and they spell cardio with a K, the electrocardiogram. So instead, here on this side of the pond, we spell cardio with a C, even though we still call it an EKG. Some people call it an ECG. What is it? It is a measure of the electrical activity of the heart. It is not a direct measurement of the physical activity of the heart, even though we can predict where the physical activity would be if we know where the electrical activity was. If you can follow that, you're doing pretty well. If you need to pause and rewind the video, take a minute to do so. Okay, these are the significant portions of one cardiac cycle measured on an EKG. The P wave, Q, R, S, T. I don't know why they didn't call it the A, B, C, D, E, but maybe the guy's daughter was Penny or Patricia, but they start with P. The P wave represents that electrical activity spreading across the atria, right? So this beginning of the P wave is the SA node firing. And then remember, thanks to that electrical connection, the electrical activity spreads from one cell to the next. And the EKG measures that atrial depolarization as the P wave. There is a small delay. You may recall that the AV node delays just a little bit before it sends the signal down the AV bundle, and that's in order to give the ventricles time to fill completely. And so that's what this straight line is. Then QRS, the most significant, looks like a seismograph, a big earthquake here. QRS is ventricular depolarization. It's so much bigger. It's so much larger in amplitude, and that really has to do with the fact that the atria are pretty wimpy and that the ventricles are really muscular and robust. And so when the electrical activity spreads through these muscles, it is a much larger signal. Ventricular repolarization is the so-called T wave. So atrial depolarization, ventricular repolarization. It's logical for you to be wondering what happened to atrial repolarization. Well, the truth is it happens in the background of this big earthquake, and so we can't really see it. Okay. Here's what an EKG might look like. Actually, these are all pathological ones. Let me show you what an EKG looks like in a longer strip here. A 12-lead EKG is the standard. Some of you may already have had the opportunity to put a 12-lead EKG on a patient. But we can see here on this picture the location of all of the leads. Feet and hands, and right across the chest coming around a bit. So look at this. The reason is each of these leads is the polar opposite of one of the other. And so what do we see? We are all looking at the same event, but from 6 different angles. Now this is important. Imagine if we all saw an accident and the police officer asked, well, Which way was the guy heading? You might say he was heading to the left, but from my perspective, he was heading to the right. Right? We're looking at the same event just from different perspectives. Look at that. The same thing here. This guy says, yep, it's definitely going up right here. But at the same point in time, this other guy's like, no, he was definitely going down. So it's really a matter of perspective. The other thing to keep in mind is the Doppler effect. Remember that? The Doppler effect is why a vehicle sounds like it's going faster when it's coming towards you, and then it slows down as it goes away. I live on a busy road. You might be able to hear the cars in the background right now. The point is, we're going to see some of the signal be skewed as it approaches and then goes away from one or the other pole. So many people looking at the same event from different perspectives, and the Doppler effect allows us to take each of these individual strips and merge them together into what we might call a composite strip. And that is sort of what we see right here, sort of an overall P wave, Q, R, S, T wave, P, Q, R, S, T, P, Q, R, S, T, so on and so forth. Remember, after all, I'm a chiropractor, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know anything about the heart. I'm just kidding. But no, I have never read a strip. And so it really impresses me to watch cardiac nurses and cardiologists watch real-time telemetry, and it means something to them. It just sort of looks like an earthquake to me. What do you need to know? Well, I wouldn't expect you to know any more than I do, so you need to know P, Q, R, S, T, what each of these represents, and then flipping back and forth between slide number 21 and slide number 26. I want you to be able to correlate those sections of the graph with the events in this mystery animation and on this image right here. All right. Moving right along, a lovely table that shows us some of the different types of arrhythmias, right? Lack of rhythm. Lack of rhythm. There's a joke there, but when your heart is beating in an irregular way, you have an arrhythmia. And so we can see fast heart rate and slow heart rate and twitching of the atria and twitching of the ventricles. Ooh, that's a bad one. You might want to pause the video right now. Watch the animation on the electrical conduction system of the heart, and then make sure that you can identify the parts of the electrical conduction system, that you can put them in order in terms of their firing or function, and then be able to describe both why the AV node delays prior to firing and the sections of the EKG and how they relate to this picture.